Hello and welcome back to Meerkat Chris. Are we too harsh on CGI in modern movies? This has kind of been something that's interested me for a very long time, but the idea to make a video out of it actually spawned from a comment I got on my Black Panther review from the other week. Kind of inspired me to just make this video in general. I kind of took it a different route, if that's okay with you. Nice, generous person who commented on my video. CGI, computer generated imagery, is a fairly recent filmmaking technique. It was introduced in films as early as Westworld from the 70s, and slowly made its way up to popularity with the likes of Tron, but especially Jurassic Park, Terminator 2, and Titanic. Yes. These films kind of mixed CGI with practical effects, which we'll get onto in a minute. Whether that be a deliberate choice by the filmmaker or if it was really just down to a lack of knowledge of how the technology works or the budget limits of the technology, I don't know. But all I do know is that over time, CGI became the standard in filmmaking thanks to films like Episode 2 Attack of the Clones, Star Wars, 300, and eventually Avatar, released in 2009. So these are films throughout the mid to late 2000s. And I'm not really surprised. I mean, CGI is a pretty cool tool when used appropriately, and it offers up much more potential for the filmmakers to work and expand on their creations, whether that be implementing greater scale of world building, more diverse and inhuman-like characters, and, unlimited power when it comes to creating action set pieces these days. Yeah. And it has always seemed like great potential. But I do think that a lot of people agree that a lot of films in the 2000s especially have been dated upon arrival, due to the lack of CGI polish. It did get better and better over time, even pushing people's expectations and suspension of disbelief in the movies completely out of the window with the likes of Avatar, for example. That was a pretty big deal. As a consequence to this, though, I do think a lot of movies became a lot more expensive to make because of stuff like this. I mean, even TV shows had also started dipping their little fingers into Hollywood's newest technology and implemented much cheaper alternatives to their own shows. To many varied opinions across the globe, I guess you could say. I mean, that's just bad, really. Yeah, there has been a big backlash to CGI over the past decade or so. A lot of people wanted a classic return to form, with strong emphasis on real-life practical effects, sets, and even puppets. I think one of the more common complaints towards CGI was that it looked a bit tacky, cheap, and, relatively outdated. It is true that a lot of 90s and 2000s early CGI-led films have dated really, really badly, even after only a single decade. I mean, the practical stuff in Jurassic Park is the stuff people refer back to when talking about that film. Some people do point out the CGI in it and be like, oh, it's still good, it still holds up, but I mean, does it? Does it? I think even in that film, most of the CGI still sticks out. Just look at this scene, for example. I can't buy that, ever. I mean, Jurassic Park still does hold up with some of the CGI elements. I mean, I don't know how they got away with that even back then, and still to this day, compared to a lot of films of today, especially. But most of the stuff, including the T-Rex and such, and the really famous T-Rex scenes, were done with practical puppets. But then again, on the flip side of things, it's not exactly like all of practical effects still hold up to this day. In fact, I'd actually go as far as to say that a lot of people just excuse a lot of the old dated practical effects in a lot of older films. I think it has something to do with a lot of people being brought up on the practical effects driven films such as like Jurassic Park or The Thing, for example. Granted, I do think it holds up a lot better than a lot of the older CGI that we've had in the past, but as much as The Thing looks great and all, this still looks kind of fake. I mean, it just does, But for some reason, we just excuse it, Maybe it has something to do with it actually physically being there in real life with the actors to work with. Not only does it actually give something for the actors to actually work off, but lighting and textures work in a different way to what CGI is really capable of. I do think that in recent years, though, filmmakers have not only started to tone down on the use of excessive CGI, but also instead found ways to correctly use and apply it to certain things and certain scenes. They seem to generally be used more specifically for shots that need them, or work amongst a practical set and have them worked around the lighting on set. I mean, I actually really admired the Tarkin and Leia CGI in Rogue One as much as everybody else hated it. I liked what they were going for, and I thought it was kind of believable. It does have a bit of the uncanny valley here and there, but I think this technique has already been perfected in the likes of Blade Runner 2049. They seem to work with very dim lighting and not too much exposure on the character that they were doing this technique to, and it came across as very believable, at least for me. Filmmakers have also discovered that using full motion tracking goes a lot further to help sell fully formed CGI characters, such as with Andy Serkis and his great work in pretty much anything that he's in. The things that particularly stand out to me is him as Snoke in The Last Jedi and him as Caesar in the Dawn of the Planet of the Apes and War for the Planet of the Apes. Exceptional CGI use there with great motion tracking. Really sells it. Like, you can kind of forget that it's CGI for a bit, and I think that's how it should be done. It's as perfect as CGI can be, in my opinion, at least for the time being. And then there was the whole case with Duncan Jones and his independent directorial debut, Moon, from 2009, where he worked with minimalistic CGI, opting to build more traditional sets and models of the sci-fi accessories that he needs. But, and this is where it's interesting, then he tidied it up with some CGI touches here and there in post-production. To me, I actually think that the practical models, such as the Doom Buggy or whatever it is, are actually the weakest part of those films. Like, I don't quite buy them. They look like models, like little models that are just kind of like bouncing all over the place. But it does kind of sell it being on the moon and with low gravity and all that. But then he adds in the CGI touches here and there, such as maybe some particle effects or some mud that like squirts up against the tire or something, and it really sells the effect. Like, it tricks your brain into thinking that's a real thing. And very recently, we have had more and more filmmakers opt for practical-led film productions. This was probably most relevant with the rise of popularity of Christopher Nolan, but more recently it's also worked its way ironically into the Star Wars films, the new trilogy of Star Wars films with J.J. Abrams leading the way. Yeah, they opted for more practical-led stuff with a bit of CGI to help here and there. I actually pretty much adore most of the CGI stuff in Rogue One. I actually believe that the space battle in that film is probably the most believable and realistic looking space battle I've ever seen. And yes, I love the original trilogy and its original trilogy practical effects and models, but at the end of the day, they still look like models, as good as they are, you know? And Christopher Nolan's efforts to showcase an incredible interstellar space journey is beautiful. And both those films utilize practical effects, but also have the assistance of CGI to help them out here and there. So, maybe CGI isn't quite as bad as people make it out to be. Filmmakers just have to use it correctly and only where necessary. Why not pull a Duncan Jones or Christopher Nolan and combine CGI with practical effects to get the best out of both of them, you know, and have the benefits of each and make a perfect effect out of it. Anyway, yeah, that's the end of the video. This video is more intended to get a conversation going in the comments, so why not join in? I'm genuinely interested in hearing your thoughts, because it is a bit of a weird thing, CGI. Some people hate it, some people love it, some people are just like, well, if it works, it works. I have nothing against it, so let me know what you guys think down below. That means the comment section.